why don't you put Portapotty somewhere? Well, guess what? One Portapotty, right? After you go through all the red tape and the regulation, it costs $1 million to build one Portapotty. And then they did it. And then they closed it from midnight to 8 a.m. I'm like, well, what do people have to do when they wake up at 7, and they got to go? They go.
Yeah. I was going to tell you, and I don't think this will surprise you, that I was nervous for this, which is nice because I feel like I don't get nervous anymore, which is kind of, it's kind of a problem. Nervousness serves a purpose, right?
For sure.
But it made me think, do you ever get starstruck?
So rarely, but yeah, somewhat. I think probably years ago, the most starstruck I was, if you will, was it was when Barack Obama was running against Hillary Clinton, actually. And I'd met him and he knew who I was and sort of made some poker jokes and whatnot. But outside of that, I mean, I've met a decent number of like actual celebrities, not just politicians. And sometimes, it's a cool interaction, but I'm pretty standoffish, frankly. It's like, it's a flaw of mine because generally speaking, I don't like to bother them, and I just want, I want to leave them alone. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want them to think I want something from. So what they often end up leaving the experience with is like, man, he's a jerk. I'm like, no, I really was just trying to I just didn't want to pretend like, so I play it too cool sometimes. And that's something that I'm genuinely working on because a lot of these people are people that I might, have a lot in common with.
Yeah. Maybe they want to meet you too.
Exactly.
But that also makes me wonder, like, if you think they don't want to be bothered, what does that say about you? Does that mean you don't want to be bothered? Like if I see you out in Vegas, should I not bother you? How do you feel about that?
So on a much smaller scale than like, big celebrities, especially during the World Series or whatever, a lot of my, when I'm walking around and stuff like that, people want pictures and stuff like that. And there's a time and a place. Sometimes people don't really understand when the time and the place is. Like what I always tell people when I do the vlogs each summer is when I'm on break, it's my break. I really need this break. It's only 15 minutes. I got to run, grab a snack, go to the bathroom. And if you stop me for a picture, somebody else behind you is going to go, one more. And then that person behind him goes, one more. So I generally tell people to do it while I'm at the table, and when I'm in between hands. So it doesn't like intrude on my break.
Yeah. So getting back to this idea of nerves or anxiety, and it's serving an important biological purpose, I think. Do you get nervous before poker matches?
Not really anymore, but much like, you were sort of saying, there are some times where you get hyped up, like I'm super excited to maybe play some of the bigger ones and things like that. But I think when you think of being nervous or being excited, it's ultimately the same emotion. And it's really a choice which way you want to go with it. Like, are you going to just like be afraid of the situation and fear and anxiety? Or are you going to be like pumped up and excited and go, let's go, I feel alive? And I'm usually the latter.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was talking with Renata Moicano, who's an MMA fighter, and I was saying it must be nice to not have any fear. Like everywhere you go, you can just defend yourself, right? And he was saying, well, that's not true. It's not that I don't have any fear. What I do is really dangerous. It's just that I've learned to channel the fear into something productive and to let the fear drive me. And I think by the same token, it's like learning to turn nervousness into excitement. That can actually be very powerful.
Yeah, no question about it. Right. Like living with anxiety doesn't sound like any fun.
Right. Well, I wanted to actually blend law with poker because I can't help it. I mean, I'm a lawyer after all. And I think when people ask me when I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, how I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, one thing I think about is how much I love playing games. And when I play games, okay, yes, I obviously want to win. I'm pretty competitive, but also I want to make sure that people play by the rules. I'm like, I'm looking out. I'm like, don't bend these rules. But also I want the rules to be fair. And in fact, when we play games, like as a family or with friends, we very often are changing the rules to make them what we think makes them more fair, which I think in when it comes to games, that would mean like more based on merit than luck. But I think that's what we do in constitutional law, right? Is that we argue about rules and whether they're being applied consistently and how they were written or how they should be written. And I saw that you recently had this kerfuffle about rules, and it made me wonder, you were talking about the rule changes in poker and some of the things you would advocate for rules changes. And I wanted to ask you if it made you feel like a lawyer.
I'll tell you what, everything you were speaking was speaking to my heart because I'm a nerd when it comes to that stuff. I love like fairness, and I'm all about, let's make rules that make sense for the majority of the people. And one thing I'll say in poker is, generally speaking, when people think of rules, they don't think about what's best for the society, what's best for population. Think of what is best for me personally. And in poker, for example, I have some influence at the World Series of Poker, and people come up to me and say, here's what we need to do. I'm like, okay, who does that benefit? You, the other pros. What about the majority of the players? Oh, it doesn't, does it? Right? So I try to think bigger. I think of like, what is the societal impact? Which is funny because on our podcast, my wife and I, we just had this discussion about, she comes from empathy, right? Like, she'll look at one case of one person who's in pain and go, okay, let's help this person. I'm like, okay, but wait a minute. What is the societal impact if we do this? And is there any social contagion or whatever the case may be? We were actually talking about assisted suicide law. And, it's just interesting how, she comes from that heartwarming, loving place, but I can't get over, thinking like more on a macro level.
Yeah, I think it's something that's going on right now and has been going on for a long time in constitutional law, like not only thinking about immediate gains, especially when it comes to the Constitution and government, because you craft this rule based on what's it going to lead to right now. But when the next person comes into power, they have totally different aims from you and they abuse that law. So yeah, there's this idea of consistency and not putting immediate gains before principle, I think, in constitutional law. But getting to like the actual rules, I wanted to ask you, because then I was looking into this whole thing. And I saw one of the things that you advocated for was getting rid of masks or face coverings, which makes sense for me at the poker table. Like it's taking away an important part of the game. But the other thing was sunglasses. And like the libertarian in me is like, wait, why can't we let people do what they want? But also, that's like a history and tradition of poker. So what's the impetus behind that?
Okay, well, the main reason is simply this. Technology has advanced beyond what we could ever imagine with artificial intelligence, et cetera. There's always been people that want to cheat. Okay, that's always been part of the game. People want to find an angle and whatnot. Unfortunately, sunglasses are one way in which you can mask your cheating and one way to facilitate it. They can be used as a tool to, see the backs of cards and things like that. So aside from poker should be pure, poker shouldn't be a game where you hide wearing a face mask and it's supposed to be a people game. If you're not comfortable playing the people game, then you can play internet poker if you like, and you can be in your underwear and relaxed and not worry about people reading your face. But that's part of the game. So mainly the sunglasses was to protect against, eventual or just any sort of opportunity to cheat.
That's so interesting. And I promise not to bore you with constitutional law, but it really does get into this debate about, there are things that the framers may have written or intended, but they couldn't foresee the advances in technology that now, change the facts on the ground.
Yeah, like what did the Constitution say about like Pornhub? I don't think it realized that was going to be a thing.
Not written in there.
Yeah.
I'd love to go back in time and interview James Madison though on that.
Yeah.
So on this theme, have you ever had to argue a rule, like rule lawyer at the table?
Many times, because there's always interpretation, right? One of the things that I think they overall do a pretty good job of in poker is just having like a blanket rule. But some of them are stupid, right? And listen, I'm always going to follow the rules, but I'm also going to loudly speak out when some rules are really, really dumb. One of the rules in question came up last year, and it's essentially, I guess the equivalency to like a government would be like hand-holding. Like, we need to protect them from. No. We're all gambling for high stakes in a competition. If you make a mistake that was your fault, you pay the piper. Okay. And for those that play poker, whatever, the situation was quite simple. I was already in the hand. Another player didn't see that I was in the hand, and he raised. He put out an amount to raise. Everyone else folded. I still have a hand. He threw his hand away. His hand's in the muck. Oh. So what does that mean? That means I win, period. And I win the bet, right? So the floor was called over, and it was ruled that he got to take his bet back, which is totally unfair to everyone else. And I'm not big on, going above and beyond to like protect people from themselves in situations like this. This should be a case where you are 100% responsible for you throwing your hand away. That never happens outside of you doing it. So when you do, you should pay the full penalty.
Yeah. And you can have empathy for that person.
Yeah.
Like, that sucks, but that doesn't mean we change it.
And I will say this. I will say that that rule specifically, you might want to make it based on sort of the buy-in level and type of player. So if you're talking about beginners or, people just learning the game, okay, maybe you give them a little bit more leeway. This was like $100,000 buy-in, and I'm up against this Russian gangster guy who's like won tens of millions of dollars playing poker. He doesn't need the break. He doesn't need his handheld. He doesn't need, big tournament director like protecting him from himself.
Right. So much more meta there going on with constitutional law, but I'll let it go. What's the most unfair poker rule in existence right now?
The most unfair poker rule? Well, that's it. I mean, that's the one that comes to mind, is this idea. Because what people don't realize is anytime you create a rule, you're going to have people that think, how can I use this to do what's called an angle shoot, right? So angle shooting, for those that don't know the term, it's essentially you're playing within the rules, but you're really taking advantage of a rule and manipulating it in your best interest. So in this case, right, I could see that you're in the hand, right? I could put in a big raise. And then if I notice that you're going to call, I could throw my hand away, right? If I'm bluffing. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, no, I'm so sorry. I didn't see that the player, I didn't see that he was in, so I get my money back. No. That would be an angle because, for example, if he does make the raise and he sees that I'm just folding, he wins the hand, right? And otherwise, he can see that I'm calling and then throw it away. So it's what we call a free roll. It's playing within the rules, but it's certainly shooting an angle. So that one needs to be fixed. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, people act what's in their own best interest, and any rule has to be crafted to think about that.
Don't hate the game. Don't hate the player. Hate the game.
Right. Right. I guess by the same token, have you thought about what's the most unfair law in the books? Is this something that keeps you up at night or not so much?
Well, I would imagine there's a lot of unfair laws. One that comes to mind right now is I think of the number of people that are in jail right now for selling things that are completely legal for the government to sell now, marijuana and the like, right? What I'd like to see is let's empty the jails of those people and fill them with all the people that are burning cars and doing domestic violence in the cities and stuff like that. Like, I just think that, they should be, I think, first of all, the sentences are far too long for misdemeanors like that. Like, just so many people and obviously, not all drugs are the same, right? Like obviously fentanyl and, crack cocaine should be a lot. I think it should be considered very different than marijuana. And for many years it wasn't, right? They were all considered in the same class of drugs, which I think confuses kids because kids are told, oh, no, all these drugs are bad. I'm like, yeah, but I did marijuana and I'm okay. So maybe I'll do heroin. You know what I mean? They did a poor job with that. And I just think there's too many people in jail. I think also just in general, the concept of for-profit prisons is a mess. I mean, when you have incentive as a prison to fill your building, now you're going to look for ways to fill it and maybe put some people in there that shouldn't be.
It's interesting. I mean, I come from a place of heavy skepticism towards government. And I think a lot of those incentives are very poor too. I mean, we all think government is benevolent and doesn't have those same incentives, but it very much does. I mean, the whole bureaucracy is built towards sustaining itself and constant expansion and ticketing as many people as possible. It all, I don't know. If I have to pick one, I sue the government every day. I tend to think that private industry does a better job of almost everything than government.
And I wouldn't even disagree with you. I just think in this case, nobody should be profiting from, prisons and stuff like that. It just seems like that's not what it should be for.
You've talked a lot about dealing with big losses. I mean, that happens a lot in poker, and resilience. And it reminds me a lot of Stoicism, which has helped me in my own life, just be resilient, not lean into victimhood, which I think current culture really has for a while, emphasized victimhood, which is really mentally damaging, especially for the youth. But anyway, I try to practice Stoicism, but I know that this stuff is all sometimes easier said than done. And I wonder, is there a hand that you've folded that to this day keeps you up at night that you regret? Or do you think you can let it go?
Well, it wouldn't be one that I folded. It would probably be one that I put all my chips in and lost, right? Like those are the regrets that we have. Usually, and obviously, there's one that I folded last week or 2 weeks ago. And I know it was on the drive home. I'm like, that was a huge mistake. And then I see it on television later and I was like, yep, I knew it. And I didn't even need to see it. I already knew it was a mistake. So those ones are frustrating because I'm like, some sort of what you were speaking to is the idea of being 100% responsible. And that's how I live my life. Right. So when bad luck happens and there's nothing that's out of my control, such as, I don't I don't spend a lot of time dwelling on, or being a victim of circumstance. I like to focus on, all right, there was an error made. How can I fix this? How can I improve upon this? So I find it much more frustrating when it's me that makes the mistake. But then what I try to do is I try to dig in and go, okay, what worked? What didn't work? All right, this didn't work. What I did here, my train of thought. So how can I address this and fix this in the future? And I think winners, champions, and whatever they do are those that when they have things that go, where they have faced adversity, they say, okay, bring it on. I get it. I'm going to learn from it, and I'm going to be better as a result, rather than womp womp. Just my luck. There's nothing I can do about it. Okay, well, I can't help you then.
Right. Yeah, there's something similar. I think that I don't know, it popped up on my algorithm that Jeff Bezos was saying that all anxiety stems from a feeling of powerlessness, that you don't feel that anxiety if you can take action over it and do something about it. So rather than just sitting, if you take action, then all of that anxiety or regret or feeling bad goes away.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of power in that sort of mindset, in like looking at, breakdowns, if you will, or situations that don't go right and go, okay, all right, cool. Here's the situation I'm faced with, chaotic. Let's fix it. Let's be better. And let's make sure that it doesn't happen in the future, being prepared.
Yeah, I heard a similar thing. There was a study about with a dog where they learned helplessness, where they taught the dog helplessness. Like they set up a game where at first the dog, it knew that if it could push the button, it would get food. But then they mixed it up so that it was arbitrary. So no matter what, the dog couldn't figure it out, and it just figured there was no way to get the food, and it became very depressed. And it would just sit there all day, and it was very sad. And then when they retaught the dog that, no, this is how you get what you want, that the dog, came alive again and felt joy. I found that story to be so powerful. Something that
I got one with humans. The very same thing you're talking about. I just saw this video about a week ago. It was a teacher who was in class, and she had a class of students, and she gave the entire class 3 words, and they were anagrams or whatever, words that you can make a word out of the word. I don't know if that's the right term. So half the class got 3 words that were unsolvable. Okay. On the left side, the other half of the class got, 3 pretty easy words. Okay. Well, actually, no, the first group got 2 unsolvable, but the third one was the same word. So, they're 2 different classes. So as they finished the word, they were told to raise their hands. Okay. And now the right side of the class kept raising their hands and the left side wasn't, and then by the third word is the same word. Okay. But what you see is by the third word, even though it's the same word by then, one side got it right, the other side didn't. And they explained their experience of helplessness and powerlessness, where they're like, well, I don't know. It was too hard. I thought I was stupid. I couldn't really do it. So the idea is that, taking events that have happened and having them decide for you, what future events, will look like. And it had a major impact. It was like literally 100% of people that got, had the first 2 problems that were unsolvable, didn't get the third one.
Yeah, that's interesting. And there are these studies about people feeling better about things. I think this is in the same vein when they've done it themselves versus having been given something. And it makes me think of something else that I know you talk a lot about with your wife on your podcast, which is homelessness. And it makes me think of the power of self-help, because how hard I think it is right now for people to dig themselves out of it, largely due. I mean, I can't help it. I'm going to say, I said what I said because of government policies. Not only can people not only dig themselves out, but helpers can't help others, help them dig themselves out. And so, I don't know what the actual solution to homelessness is, other than, making it easier to build, making it easier to, develop innovative solutions to mental health and health and drug addiction, making it easier for people to get a job. But one thing I know that we can do is ending the government's monopoly on charity. And we have a case at my law firm, it's my case, where somebody was actually put into jail for handing a homeless man a burrito. He was put into handcuffs. They eventually let him go. And I think this is so perverse. You can't, in Dayton, Ohio, you cannot give a homeless man a burrito without a government permit. And this is so absurd to me. And it made me think of something you said, I think it was just last week on your podcast, about the power of empathy and how, and it has these downstream effects. And you told this story, maybe you could retell it, about somebody handing one man a burrito and him giving it to someone else, right? Giving half of it, even though it's all he had.
Yeah.
And we're penalizing empathy.
You're absolutely right. Like, that's actually the case here in Nevada. Like, I had friends who would, make sandwiches, and they would take them all down to sort of like where there's a homeless encampment or whatever. And then police would come and, blow their sirens and say, disperse. I'm like, what do you think? We're poisoning them? Like, let people have the, maybe that is the case. Maybe people are doing that, but like, you got to let people have free will to choose if they want to trust somebody handing them a sandwich. That's overregulation beyond overregulation. And I agree with you too, on your sort of idea behind, government monopoly when it comes to charity, because I believe that it's, for the most part, homelessness and the major problem is solvable. I really do believe that. I believe that some countries, Finland tried an experiment that's actually worked quite well. One of the most difficult aspects of homelessness is most of them either, like you said, deal with a mental illness or a drug and alcohol addiction. Okay. Well, a lot of these shelters, for example, they have a no tolerance policy. You can't come in with any drugs or whatever. And it's just too difficult for these people. And you can, people with no empathetic heart can go, they're drug addicts. But like, anyway, so in Finland, what they do is they created a place for these people to live, like a community. But the rule is you cannot do any drugs or alcohol in communal spaces. So if you do it in your own apartment or whatever, what this does is it gives these people a sense of value. They have their own bed. They have a shower, right? So when you think of like how difficult it would be for somebody, let's say that's not all that skilled, that's homeless, that wants to get cleaned up and get a job. Maybe they have a record for something stupid too, right? How? How, how difficult that is? It's easy for us, sitting in these nice, comfy chairs to like sort of go, I'd do it. Really? How? How do you, where's your starting point? You're on the street. You have like a bag of clothes. You're dirty. You can't even get a shower. Who's going to hire you? And like, how do you get to work? It's just, it's an area where I believe this, like a country's only as strong as how we handle like our weakest links, not weakest links, but our, the bottom end of society. Like, how are they doing? And if they're doing okay, not great, but if they're doing okay, then I think, government policy and everything is doing really well. And I obviously don't think that's been the case, like pretty much forever.
Yeah. I have so many responses to that. That's so interesting because, a lot of times what the government says is we want to make sure that the food is cooked properly, whatever. And basically what the government is then saying is that it's better for these people to go hungry than to make the voluntary choice to take that risk and accept kindness from a stranger. We don't want them eating that, so we'll have them eat nothing at all.
It speaks to like protecting people from themselves. Like, no, right. Let people make their own choices when it comes to who they take food from.
There was actually an instance in one city where there was a group that was going to go out and feed soup to the homeless without the requisite government permit. And the regulators came in and they poured acid in the soup so as to prevent this group from feeding it. It's
that's
so
deranged. To me. That's really deranged.
The second thing I thought of when you're talking about all of that is, what does it take, giving these people a shower? How do we get them a job? And that takes a lot of bravery from people to go into these communities and help them. And it's like the government's not doing anything to help. And so why aren't we just allowing these people who I think are really brave? I have so much admiration for our clients. It's something that a lot of people do not want to do, is go in and do this hard work and help others and get them haircuts and clothes and all these things. I just have so much admiration for these people who go and do that. And also just for their level of empathy, because I think we've lost empathy for the homeless in this society. And because of how bad the problem has gotten in some cities, people just have no empathy left.
Yeah, I did a podcast a little while back where the guy that was on the podcast had zero empathy for anyone homeless and completely lacked any understanding of the problem, assuming that in 2 weeks I can get him off drugs and alcohol and be in tip-top shape. I'm like, really? If you could, man, if you had that miracle ability, get to work, okay? Because there's a lot of people that could use your help. But like, again, there's several areas where I think we fail our people. When it comes to veterans, right? No veteran who fought for this country and risked his life and lost his limbs or whatever should be on the street. None. There should be a place for them to go. They should be taken care of for life. You talk of most people that are homeless deal with some type of mental illness that's untreated, which typically leads to, drug and alcohol, addiction and stuff like that. So there's organizations like, I think of Los Angeles, because that's where a major part of the problem is. There's a couple organizations that actually do good work. So if anything, and they're private organizations, if anything, funding them, continuing to support them, say, you know what? Okay, well, you guys are doing a good job. We'll let you roll with it. The problem with California is, so for example, a lot of the streets, these homeless people, they have nowhere to go. Like, so they just on the street. because there's no place else, right? Why? Well, why don't you put Portapotty somewhere? Well, guess what? One Portapotty, right? After you go through all the red tape and the regulation, it costs $1 million to build one Portapotty. And then they did it. And then they closed it from midnight to 8 a.m. I'm like, well, what do people have to do when they wake up at 7, and they got to go? They go.
Yeah. It really is perverse. You see a lot of this creating problems and then saying you need more government regulation to get us out of those problems, but it's just a one-way ratchet in favor of more control and less good outcomes.
Yeah.
I want to turn it back to something maybe lighter, which is back to poker. I'm thinking about how it influences you as a person outside of poker, and I wonder, are you just like reading people all the time? Because you're a very good reader of people at the poker table. Does that translate into everyday life?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question of like, whether do I turn it off? And it really becomes impossible. It's something that just is innate. I think we all have that ability. I think like when you think of a baby in their mother's arms, right? They don't speak a language, but they can look in their mother's eyes. They can see, they can sense anger. They can sense sadness. They can sense happiness and joy, right? From very from just very mild facial cues, right? As we get older, we start to trust ourselves less and less about people. Have you ever met somebody and in 3 seconds, they didn't do or say anything, but you're just like, I don't like this guy. Well, what's that based on, right? It's not, but there's a lot of because there's something you saw. There's something subconscious that just gave you a vibe of this person in a very short period of time. So yeah, I think it does cross over. And I try not to, because essentially what I'm doing when I'm playing poker is I'm being judgmental, right? I'm judging people for their strengths and their weaknesses. I'm stripping them down to the bare bone. What is this person good at? What are they bad at? And discard them, right? Now, that's not a good way to be in relationship. So I have to work on that. Like with my wife, I can't, take everything she does or whatever and then judge her as, this is good, this is bad, because it's like, it's inhuman, So I do find myself trying to consciously be more accepting, of things that I find or spot.
Yeah, that reminds me of a Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote, which she said, the secret to a good marriage is being a little deaf every now and then. And reminds me a bit of that. So I think I'm very bad at lying. And I wonder, I'm going to ask you to give me a tip. What's the most obvious tell, do you think? Maybe something like most amateurs commit, the most obvious tell that shows you that they're weak. Or maybe you don't want to let that go, but I take it you can let that go.
Yeah, it's so situational. It's so dependent upon different people and different cultural backgrounds or whatever. Often what you see with beginners is the tells when they really are strong are much more prevalent, right? Like there's one subconscious tell that people do, especially beginners, they don't realize is when they see the flop cards come out and they really like it and they've got something good, their eyes will dart down to the right to their chips because subconsciously they know they're like, oh, wait, I want to bet on that. So where's my chips at? Oh, they're right here. So they'll look, they'll glance at it. And if you're watching and you're a pro, you see that, you're like, all right, beware, this isn't a pot you want to steal from that opponent. Right.
Because if they didn't want to bet, they sure as hell wouldn't be looking at
Well, usually, chips. Yeah. So that same person, you look at their eyes and if they just stare at the flop and they don't ever dart at the chips, that means they have nothing. So you can just steal that pot. And that's that's one of the more basic tells. Another one too is a lot of beginners and amateurs feign weakness by sighing. Or they'll say like, I call. I'm like, you do that. That's usually like feigning weakness, right? So you're trying to pretend like you have a difficult decision when, you have a very strong hand.
This leads me into one of my favorite current topics because I just stumbled upon this show and I was going to ask you if you watched it. And then I happened to see that you had a little segment on it. So I was so excited, which is Traitors.
Oh, love it.
Because, do you think you would be very good at Traitors, right?
So I'm actively trying to get on the show Traitors. It's a very popular show. There's a laundry list of people that want to get on. As you saw, it's a mix of people from The Bachelor, Survivor, the design, the Housewives, it's a collection. And it's all based on a game called Werewolf. Okay. Werewolf is a game that a lot of people play casually, and it was created by actually a Russian sociologist, I think, to prove, in a sense, he wanted to create a social experiment to prove that within a group of large people, let's say 20 to 30 people, 3 or 4 people with full knowledge can absolutely control the masses. And you see that play out, right? So the way it works is you have the traitors or the werewolves, there's a few of those, and their goal is to get rid of the others. And it's the job of the others to figure out who are the werewolves or traitors and get them out. right? So it's a really cool social experiment. I do think I'd be very good at it, but I also think going on it as a poker player, I'd be a huge target, right? So like literally nothing I say, they would believe, even if it was true.
Right. Yeah. And you'd have to figure out the strategy around that.
Oh,
I
I've been
wonder,
thinking
does that
about
mean then? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm sure you are. And that makes me think, I was going to ask you if you would rather be a traitor or a faithful. But, you know, if you think you're going to be a target at all times, maybe that means you would prefer to be a traitor as a matter of strategy. But personality wise, what do you think you would prefer to be, a traitor or a faithful?
Well, I think generally speaking, my strengths are being a faithful rather than a traitor, because the traitor is essentially being extremely deceptive, lying comfortably, whatever. And I can do all that, but I'm much better at spotting those that are, right?
Yeah.
And I also think for me personally going on the show, I think people are already going to always be wary of me being a traitor, right?
Yeah.
So that makes it much more difficult for me to be. Like my good friend Boston Rob was on the last season, and without giving away any spoilers, you know, they set him up in a really tough spot because he comes in as a really, really big threat. So he has to navigate things that others maybe don't have to in terms of strategy.
Yeah. But I thought this about Wes too. You know, he's in a tough spot because everyone's going to be, if you know anything about Wes, because I love the challenge, then you're naturally skeptical of Wes, but he's not a traitor. And then how do you prove you're not a traitor? It's a very interesting game.
It really is. Yeah. I imagine the frustration level when everyone's convinced that you're a traitor and you're like, dude, I'm not. But, you know, again, it's acting like you know, and to varying degrees, people are, you know, good or bad at it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I am shocked when people do not protest their traitorness. That's just such a giveaway for me. You know, if it were me and I wasn't a traitor, I'd be like, I think about this with Adnan Syed. I don't know if you ever listened to the podcast Serial, where it's about, he's imprisoned and it's about somebody trying to uncover whether he was wrongly accused or not. And he's so mellow. And it might be because he's been there for 30 years, but I always think if I was wrongly imprisoned, I would just, every conversation I would seem unhinged. I'd be like, I am not a traitor. I did not do this thing. And people really need to work on that skill on traitors. But speaking of rules and making rules better, I think traitors could use a little rule tweaking here. I've thought about this a lot. And one I think would make traitors better is if traitors had an incentive to throw the mission.
That's crazy that you just said that, because I have a text message right here from a friend and I was like, oh, I have one that I got my friend, and it's exactly that. Exactly what you said. It adds a really cool wrinkle where essentially you create two prize pots so during these missions and whatnot, you're a traitor. So you're like either going to sabotage yourself by helping them with the mission, or sabotage the mission, help yourself. But then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, they weren't trying very hard in that challenge. I love that idea. I think it's a cool wrinkle. I think each season, you know, they try to add new wrinkles and stuff like that. But that one I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And there's not a lot of tells. And that would also be, it would just be a new way for people to kind of try to sniff out who the traitor is. I look forward to seeing you on season, whatever.
We'll see.
Hopefully a soon one.
Yeah.
I hope so. Okay. One more thought on poker before I move out of poker, which is, you're known as a talker, and that's why I made a video comparing you to Justice Scalia. He's also known to be very friendly, talkative at oral argument, very likable. Well, you know, I think most people, if they know, people hate his decisions, but even his, you know, foe at the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, they were the best of friends, right? And I wonder, how much of talking at the poker table is your personality versus game strategy?
It's both, really. Like naturally, that's just kind of who I am, which makes it easy. But I'm also, you know, keenly aware that me being the way that I am allows me to gain more information on my opponents, right? The more you know about somebody, they're going through a divorce, they've had a bad run, you know, what do they do for a living? It gives you clues in terms of where their mental state's at and how they think. I'll give you an example, right? You know, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm a lawyer. I defend criminals. Okay. So you spend a lot of your time twisting narratives and lying and, you know, deceiving and, you know, trying to things like this. So, you know, you're someone that maybe bluff. Oh, what do you do? I'm a Sunday school teacher. Well, maybe a Sunday school teacher may be conflicted with the idea of lying as bluffing and maybe not as comfortable with it. So maybe they're more likely to be, you know, honest and true. And these are just clues. And you essentially like add them all up to create a profile. And I do that much more efficiently with just my natural personality and, you know, having discussions with people and learning a little bit about how they think.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was at a meeting. I probably shouldn't say this for my work, but I was at a meeting the other day, and I asked my colleague, did you hear I missed that? And she was like, yes, I'm listening because information is power. So true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, moving into another of my favorite topics, although I guess this does have a poker aspect to it, which is freedom of thought and the political moment and such. And I wonder, do you think poker has influenced your political beliefs? Because I think libertarians think that everything is libertarian. Like we either love movies or hate movies, and that's because we think they're either libertarian or statist, right? Like it's just, that's all, that's how we see the world. And I think poker has a lot of libertarian aspects to it. And I wonder if you think that there's any relationship between the two.
I do, and on two fronts. First and foremost, when you sit at a poker table, you sit with a wide variety of people, right? Like a lot of people are stuck in their bubble. So everyone just agrees with each other and they don't really learn anything. Where at a poker table, you have people from all walks of life. So getting to know and being exposed to that, helps your ability to, use critical thinking. And poker's a game where critical thinking is really, really important. And so I find a lot of poker players, frankly, are quite good at, breaking down information and trying to find the truth within, the truth. And I'm someone who's always been curious, and I've always found that like the more that I've learned about how media spins things and all that, sadly, it requires more work, I think, on my end or anyone's end to sort of, discern what's true and what's not true. But I definitely think poker's helped, also too, from like you said, the libertarian perspective of like freedom. It's a game where if you play well, you do the right things, you have the chance to succeed. Unlike, slot machines and things like that, what you see is it's a microcosm of life in a lot of ways, because champions and successful people don't usually lament their bad luck. They focus on what they can control, which is improved decisions. And you see the losers, if you will, are the same ones who are like, there's nothing I can do, man. I had pair of aces and the guy played a 9 and a 4, right? Where there's no value in that conversation. Okay, sorry about your luck. How did you get to the situation where you were? Were there any hands previously that you could have played better? What did you play? Did you make the decisions correctly, or could you have done something differently? And champions do that in life. And, I think those that typically struggle are those that look for every other possible reason as to why they're not succeeding, except their own decisions.
Yeah. And I think also there's an aspect of, there's no favoritism in poker. Everybody's on an equal playing field each hand in terms of it's your merit and your skill that gets you, that wins you the hand or not.
Yeah. Like it's one of the few places where I could compete against the guy who's 6'4", 250, in an activity where we're on equal footing. You can be big and strong, but I'm big and strong up here. So let's go.
Right. You're known as being pretty talkative and pretty outspoken, especially on social media. And I wonder if, people perceive you as having a lot of guts in terms of what you're willing to say or talk about. But have you ever felt any pressure to censor something or to not talk about something? Or is there any topic now where you're about to push send or you push send and you're like, ooh, wonder how that one's going to go over? Or have you let that go? No,
there's no question. There are some topics, right? Some topics that are heated that like I try to like think it over. And there's been plenty of, partly what, when you post something on X or whatever, it's going to like, if it's a heated thing, it's just going to be a to-do, and I typically mute the conversation. So sometimes I'll write one out and I'm like, okay, do I really need to post this? Is this of real value? And sometimes I'll just say, nah, never mind. I have a couple in my phone that I haven't posted that I've been considering for a couple of weeks that are pretty charged and, pretty hot topics. Because the thing is like, so the one of the downsides of social media is it's not a conversation really, like people aren't getting the nuance of like my intent or whatever. And they're so tribalistic that you say something, especially frankly, if you think of like, the young progressives of today, right? You say something in the wrong color or whatever, and you're an ism something, you're an ick, whatever, they label you as this monster without actually like listening to the, the content of what you're asking or what you're saying. Obviously, one of the major issues where that sort of hit a height was, just in general with like, sort of this gender, gender dysphoria and ideology or surrounding transgendered people and talking about it, just having opinions about, well, do we think it's fair that Leah Thomas swims? If you say that, you ask the question, there was a period where just asking the question made you transphobic, which is so ridiculous and so stupid, right? And And I fear anytime there's a subject where you're not allowed to have like civil conversation about it, there's a problem there, right? Can we not talk at all about the potential problems of radical Islamism? Is that off limits? Why? It's not off limits to talk about, like Buddhism or Christianity or anything else. Why just this one? Why that one, right? Why is that one so heated and charged? And whenever I see stuff like that, I do take it with a little more care because, again, it's just based. And I do that because I know people struggle to just sort of take in information from a, unbiased place. They come in with like their charged ideas of tribalism. So say anything about it and they come at you with, pitchforks.
Yeah. And I mean, that hits home for me, and I live in California, and I really try to be nuanced about things, and I'm a constitutional lawyer. So I think law is nuanced. It's a very difficult subject. And I know that it's different than partisan politics, and the justices, for example, are not just imposing their own beliefs or preferences on people. I think these questions are really tough and interesting. And I try to make that my brand, and what I put into the world is nuance. But the problem is, I think nuance nowadays is really considered a bad thing. It's like, people will say to you, there's no room for nuance on X topic. And it's like, why not? Nuance itself is considered, then you're on the other side of whatever I like because you're not with me fully. And it's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. That's, it's very true. Like, and I've always enjoyed civil discourse on a wide range of topics, and like trying to hear both sides and debate both sides, but in a constructive way without ad hominem attacks, which it usually leads to. Funny you mentioned that, because later today I'm doing a radio interview with a guy who is that guy. He's very antagonistic. He's a political, and he's constantly, he starts out with, you're a moron, you're an idiot, and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, once you've like dipped down to that place, it means you don't have a cohesive argument anymore. And it's not productive. Like, let's hear each. There's one listening exercise that I really love. I think it was in the 8th habit or the 7 habits of highly effective people. And it's essentially the idea, and maybe you've heard of it, but let's say you and I have a discussion about topic abortion, right? Now, the way that it works is I make my point. You have to repeat back to me what you heard me say. Okay. And then I have to go, yes, that's what I said. Now you get to make your point. You don't get to make your point until I feel like I've been heard. Now you do it. And what you find is when you have a discussion in this way, by the end, you find common ground. You find things you both agree on. You know what? You both agree that, like, it's sad when this happens. You both agree that you'd like to see it happen less often, right? You're still going to disagree on, the extreme versions of it, but it at least allows you to hear the other side. Because most often, I think what people do in these discussions is they're waiting for you to finish talking. They're not listening because they can't wait to prove you wrong.
Yeah, that's interesting. I used to have a podcast about dissent, and that was one of the ideas I think that we were promoting through that podcast, was that because it was it's been a rough time for the past few years, trying to dissent on anything, because it was just, you had to have an orthodoxy on one view. And, we wanted just to show that dissent is such a healthy thing, that dialogue is important, not only for feeling heard, which I think is really important, because it makes people resentful to not feel heard. But also, if you really want to persuade the other person, you need to hear their ideas, be able to engage with them, and then hone your own ideas. It makes your own ideas better. It's not just, it's actually effective for you to be a better advocate for yourself. This was something, we had an episode on RBG and Scalia, and how, and they said, even though the opinions could be biting towards each other, it always made them better. And so you should think of it as an asset and a tool for yourself, even if you don't like the idea. Think of it as a way to make yourself a more effective advocate.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way to put it. And you discussed that relationship, and I think that's beautiful. That the fact that, they were friendly and they had very different, worldviews and things like that. But I think, for example, some people are very charged and heated about which bathrooms people are supposed to use, right? So instead of just calling them all kooks and crazy, I understand why. Why is this a problem for you? What are your feelings? What are your thoughts? What are your fears? And then you can still disagree, whichever side of the fence you're on that, but at least you understand the reasoning behind why people stand where they do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as public interest lawyers here at my law firm, we have to be very careful about which cases we take. I mean, we're donor supported, we have limited funds, we have to think about it wisely, but also, getting judges to agree with you is a lot about storytelling and persuasion. And so we want to have, the best facts and whatnot. And so we really do that. But it's funny, even at my law firm, where I think we take on some of the most egregious cases, just because things have gotten so toxic in society, sometimes I'm afraid to talk about them. And I think about that at night. Like, why am I afraid to talk about a case which is so obviously correct? We had this case, I'll give you an example, where there was a 6-year-old who was forced to apologize in front of her class, sit out for 2 weeks from recess. She's 6 years old. She's done with recess for 2 weeks. And she was prohibited from drawing any pictures, any crayon drawings. After she drew a picture for a friend, they had given her some lesson on Black Lives Matter in class. And she had drawn a picture for her friend that said, Black Lives Matter, all lives. And, there's like a spelling error, and it's not even like a cohesive thought. It's a 6-year-old, but it's so innocent and pure. Like, she obviously was not making a political statement at 6 years old. And she was forced to apologize and to sit out from recess and told she can't draw pictures. And I just thought that was so heinous. And it's such a good example of how bad our society has gotten. And even yet that example, I'm afraid to bring up to people because everything is so toxic, and it's hard to fight back against that. Even as a lawyer, myself, or someone who's very ideological, it's just become very oppressive.
You're right. And, I think it's regressive too, because I feel like, in my childhood or whatever, I grew up in Toronto. There's people from all walks of life. It's the most multicultural city in the world. Racism didn't even enter my mind or whatever. Right. But I feel like, and there's plenty of studies that show this, when you introduce it to young kids, right? Young kid who has a friend who's just their friend, right? And now you tell them, no, your friend is different. You need to treat your friend differently because they've suffered through different types of oppression. All of a sudden, you walk around on eggshells now as a child, and it actually heightens racism because it makes people afraid to connect in authentic ways, and just be real with each other. They're always sort of watching their P's and Q's, and it raises the tensions among different groups of people. I think it's done so much more damage than good. Like a lot of these, whatever you want to call them, like, DEI trainings, like Coca-Cola, be less white, like, it's just what, like, hold on, like, you've gone too far with this sort of stuff. I'm all for, absolutely, like, being inclusive, diverse, all this sort of stuff sounds good in theory, but like these trainings, all they did was make things worse in the work environment, where people now don't even feel like they should, have discussions with them because there's so many things. There's so many landmines they could step on. So it's easier to just go, you know what? I don't want to deal with it. I'm not saying nothing. I don't want to get fired.
Yeah. There's a study that just came out about, they put 2 groups through, one through DEI training and one not, and then gave them the same prompt, and they were pretty neutral. If you look at the statement and you haven't been, and you weren't in the study, you realize the statement's pretty neutral, but they give it to 2 people in this study, one who's been through DEI, one who's not. And the one that's been through DEI is like far more angry and outraged by these very neutral statements, right? Like, it's made people angrier. And I think for really corrosive and stereotypical reason, it engenders stereotypes. Like you said, if you tell people, well, this person you have to treat differently because they've been oppressed or whatever, you're making that judgment solely because of their skin color. You're saying because of their skin color, they have experienced this, which is a very bizarre thing to assume, that skin color means anything. I mean, that is racism. That's the opposite of being progressive.
Well, that's why I said, the whole thing is regressive, because essentially what you're doing is you're saying we need to defeat racism by separating people based on race and judging. Wait a minute. So end racism by introducing more racism. And you look at college admissions for many, many years. If you're a young Asian male, your barometer is through the roof to even get in. You could have crazy numbers, but because you're being pitted against other Asian males who happen to succeed culturally, the people, those types of people have parents who push them and academically, and so they're punished, right? So you're essentially saying, okay, to help other groups, we're going to punish this group, right? And that doesn't work. It doesn't work because what it does is it creates resentment too. And, sometimes it's justified. Like if you're an Asian kid and you're 18 and you did everything, you got a great GPA, all the things, and you don't get in, well, people far less qualified than you, in terms of your numbers it feels unfair. Because why? Because it is unfair. That's not the way to do it. I'm always about, like you said, merit-based. I'm a big fan of Coleman Hughes, who sort of discusses Martin Luther King's idea, which was Martin Luther King didn't put forth a bill to based on race. He did it based on social class, on poverty. And within poverty, guess what? There are poor white trash kids, if you will. There are poor black kids. There are also affluent, black kids in Atlanta who have parents that are both lawyers and whatever. So to just specifically do it based on race is, like I said, it just creates a bigger divide, and it's less effective too.
Yeah. We actually have a few lawsuits representing children, because this is what's crazy to me. It's not only, people don't know, it's not only in higher education. It had actually started, and I think still is, it had started trickling down to K through 12 education, where at specialized public schools,
Mm-hmm.
they analyzed the racial demographics of the class there, which, by the way, race is it means it's such a hard thing to define. The government's very bad at it. So, Asian can mean people with widely different cultures and religions and languages and different parts of the world. But anyway, putting all that aside, they did an analysis, and then they decided that there were too many kids of one race. And so they reconfigured all the admissions criteria to kick out a bunch of kids solely because of their race under the name of progress and equality. And it seems so obviously unconstitutional and contrary to American values.
It does. And I look at, okay, so the last election, right, which was essentially like a mandate, if you will, from the American people saying, we've had enough with this. You lost anyway. So then I watched sort of the DNC chair discussing how they wanted to replace these seats, and there were 6 seats or something, and they had 2 women and 2 men. And the guy went up there and said, okay, we need to have 2 non-binary to be gender balanced. Why? I mean, why? Okay, here's the thing, right? How about just pick 6 people that are best fit for the job, right? Make it available for women, mentor women, all these types of things. But like, you have 2 men and 2 women. Is it really that important to have, 2 people that are considered whatever? I don't know. It's just, when you do that, it's like, you're really not listening. You're not listening to what the American people are saying about this stuff. We want normalcy. Okay.
Yeah.
And some of this stuff, like when you start to talk about, changing the definition of women who have children to like people who give birth, or, pregnant people, things like this. Like, you want to change the legal definitions. When you have a judge being asked the question, like she was a judge that was in Congress, being audited or whatever. It's like, what is a woman? Which is a simple question. If you're stumped at that question, if that's the question that stumps you, then you have to sort of take a look at your entire movement as a whole and go, hold on, guys, shouldn't we have an answer to that one? Because if we can't get past that, how do we make any case for the people that we're advocating for? Like, it makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and this is something I think Coleman Hughes has talked about too, is, a lot of these efforts are actually, they end up being very harmful to the groups that they're trying to help. I had a case in California where they had mandated a minimum number of women, a woman quota for corporate boards. And it was incredible because women were actually making huge strides. They were expected to become on parity in terms of hiring patterns by, I think it was like 2040 or something. It's not that long away. But they were already making huge strides year over year. And then California comes in with this woman quota. And what does that tell? First of all, it tells women anytime, because they said you need this because you're being discriminated against at huge rates. It tells women anytime you walk into an interview, you're going to be discriminated against. And oh, by the way, if you get the job now, it's only because of the government. You probably didn't deserve to be there, wouldn't have been chosen. And it tells everybody else in the boardroom, like, hey, that woman, she's a quota hire, when she probably would have been hired because women were having such great success rates without the law.
That was in his book. The whole
thing is perverse.
Yeah, that was in his book, The End of Race Politics, which I thought was fascinating, which, specifically, like you said, so for example, the math doesn't work on what people try to claim. So let's say, for example, there's 100 doctors, okay? And you need to hire 20, okay? And but at the same time, no, let me say this. Let's say you want, of the top 100 doctors who get through, you want 20 of them to be people of color, okay? But of the top 100, there was only 13, right? So what that means is now you have to reach outside of the top 100 and go a little bit lower, which essentially, for lack of a better term, lowers the bar, right? A little bit. And now, what if you are a black doctor who is just the best, right? You have to live with, or you have to be, have to deal with the idea that some people may think you got there because of the color of your skin. So you actually do a disservice to highly qualified women or people of color when you allow for people to actually have the thought of, well, maybe you're only there because, Maybe you weren't the most qualified, but you're there because of a special stipulation, which in hindsight would mean, man, this is a white male and he got in. He must be really good.
Right.
Right. So you actually reverse it.
Yeah. Yeah. And plus the studies that say that people don't feel as good once they know that they've gotten a leg up. I thought it was incredible when we went into court on that woman quota case. We asked them what their justifications were. And I kind of thought they would lean into this idea of just pure balancing, like balancing is a good in and of itself, and they would just leave it there. But what the government actually said was, well, women bring something special to the table, je ne sais quoi, if you will. Women have a different leadership style, and also they're more risk averse, and they tend to carry less corporate debt when they're on boards than men. And so what you're actually saying in court is that there should be more women on boards because they are penny pinching, risk averse, transformative leaders. To say this stuff out loud is crazy. I mean, I think men and women are different, but as Ruth Bader Ginsburg would say, that doesn't mean all women are the same, right? Equality is supposed to make sure that people are treated as individuals, even regardless of generalizations that hold true over groups.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with you. And I think, again, what we're facing too in terms of stereotypes, I think women for many years broke out of the stereotype that you're just like a Stepford housewife, right? That you can be strong, you can be powerful, you can be a lawyer, whatever. And I feel like what we're reverting back to is this idea that no, women wear dresses. That's what, women are feminine. Women are well, we literally tried to break out of this idea, break out of that mold that women can be whatever they want to be, right? But I think we're sort of with a lot of the confusion about quote unquote what a woman is. It's regressive in that regard because you're basing it based on stereotypes. Well, this person likes to wear dresses and all this stuff, so that's a woman. Well, this woman likes to play sports and be a mechanic and fix cars, so maybe they're not a woman. What? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, they're just them, right?
Yeah.
Whoever you are is who you are. Okay, one last question on constitutional law, because I actually had to look this up. Not all countries have written constitutions, and I was like, does Canada have a constitution? But anyway, just wondering, based on your experience, do you have any perspective on Canadian versus U.S. Constitution? And if you don't, it's fine, but I had to ask.
Yeah, so I've been in Las Vegas for most of my life, and I was very young when I was in Canada and didn't pay a lot of attention to Canadian politics at the time, so I never really delved into that. So I wouldn't know. I mean, I would imagine that the United States, from every constitution I've considered or looked at, has some of the strongest free speech laws, which is something I've become more and more passionate about as I've gotten older, because I think it really is important. And some of the things that I'm seeing happening in Canada and other places make me question whether or not there is solid, it's specifically on that one.
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of written constitutions, and in particular our Constitution. I mean, I love it; it's my job, but to defend it, I think it's good and correct. But what's interesting is I read somewhere that actually Russia has a written protection for free speech in its constitution.
Yikes.
So yeah, I've
that
heard
failed.
people say, yeah, right, and that's why it's so interesting that so much of protecting our freedoms depends not only on parchment paper, but also on a culture of wanting to protect free speech. You can have it on paper, but it's something else entirely to perpetuate it.
And I think people misunderstand, frankly, and I'm speaking as a layman, obviously, on the subject, but when you think of free speech, I think people misunderstand that, okay, just because you are allowed to say anything doesn't mean that it comes with no consequences. Right? Now, the question is, should there be legal consequences, right? If I hired you to do a job and you were just rude and obnoxious and said mean, racist things, I should be able to fire you. Should you also be prosecuted? No, I don't think so. There's very few things that I think are worthy, physical threats, things like that. But other than that, I think what protecting free speech really looks like, and again, this is in Coleman's book, is to protect the freedom of people who have abhorrent views that say the most awful things you disagree with, protecting their right to say them and, without legal persecution.
Yeah. And to your point, there's a lot of confusion about what a constitutional right entails. People ask me oh, I want to sue so-and-so because they wouldn't let me come over. I went to their dinner and they were offended, so they kicked me out of their house and they're abridging my free speech rights. I'm like, well, you don't have a free speech right to go onto somebody else's property and say whatever you want. You have a right for the government not to throw you in jail for that. But, it's constantly having to educate people about the Constitution. Okay, I wanted to wrap up by doing a series of rapid fire questions. So just throw it out, unless you want to elaborate, but let's try it.
Do you prefer
Doge
rapid
task
fire?
force.
Do you prefer rapid fire or do you prefer me to elaborate?
I think rapid fire.
Okay, I'll
I think
give it a
rapid fire.
shot.
I mean, I could talk about Doge, and now I've revealed the first question.
Okay.
I revealed my cards before. But anyway, well, this one you take it how you want. Doge task force, good or bad?
Overall, much needed, eagerly overdue, good.
Yeah. Okay. Favorite Supreme Court justice, if you have one.
Don't think I have one.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't have like fan cards of like judges. Maybe.
Oh, you mean you don't have an RBG
No.
or bobblehead?
No, but I did like her. I did like her.
Yeah, she's a good person. I mean, I like Justice Kennedy, but I won't get into it. Okay. Formula One in Vegas. Did you go? Do you like it? How do you feel about Formula One?
Hate the fact that they do it here. It ruins the city for months. It's a disaster. I know that they make money from it, but good riddance. I hope it never. I mean, I know it's here for 10 years, but I hate it.
Maybe they'll improve, though.
What's that? Well,
maybe they'll improve.
It's really bad for small businesses in the area, whatever. Like they build these steps and stairs. It ruins the experience too for a lot of people that come to Vegas because you can't see the Bellagio fountains because it's covered by all these stands and stuff. And if it was just a 3-day thing, all for it, good for it. But it isn't. It's months, and it'll get better. I imagine. Like the first year versus the second, it was much better.
Yeah. What about Formula One in general? Are you a fan?
Nah, I don't care.
Okay. If you could press a button to guarantee winning every poker game for the rest of your life, but that naturally means that you'll never feel the thrill of gambling again, would you do it?
No, because it wouldn't just be about the thrill of gambling. It would be the thrill of competition. If you're not competing, if you just automatically win. I love the what do you call it? The thrill of victory requires the agony of defeat.
Lovely. Well said. If you were to deviate from your vegan diet and eat one non-vegan meal, what would it be?
If I were to add anything, probably eggs, because eggs is a really perfect protein. So that's what I would probably add to the diet.
Feel that. They're in a lot of things.
Yeah.
Thoughts on slow rolling? Not
my cup of tea, but you do you.
Very speaks to my own philosophy about most things. If you could play a poker game against anyone, who would it be?
Well, dead or alive?
Yeah, anyone.
I always go with Bob Marley because I was fascinated by him. I was a big fan of Bob and just his life philosophies. And not that I agree with all of them or whatever, but I just thought he was a really unique individual. And I would love to just hang out and chill and have a few beers, let him smoke his weed and, play a little poker.
Yeah. Someone asked me something similar, like, who would you want to meet? And I was like, Paul McCartney. And not because same thing. He's not like my intellectual hero or something, but
yeah,
he's a Beatle.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the craziest prop bet you've been involved in?
Probably for me, well, there's a couple. One was a golf bet. The other is the other was a golf bet that I could not win, but I did for like $550,000. The other one was kind of a silly bet. I was about 25 and I was playing poker with a guy named Ted Forrest, and he bet me that I said I was like 135 pounds at the time, very skinny. And he made me a bet that in my lifetime I'd be over 170 at some point. I'm like, that's never going to happen ever because I eat clean, whatever. So he's like, I said, I'll give you 20 to 1 odds on it. Right. So he threw me a $1,000 chip because that's the way it would have to work. I keep the 1,000. If I ever weigh 170, I have to give him his 1,000 plus 20 more back. Well, I started to work out a little bit, started to eat a little more. And then I ended up hitting like 172. So I found him and it's all based on, on your word. So I weighed the scale. It was 172 and I paid the man his money.
It's nice though when it works out that, I don't know if this is something, like, were you proud? It's good if the prop bet is like, I'll pay you 21 grand because I booked up and I'm stoked.
No, it wasn't all good weight. There was a dirty bulk. There was a little bit of a pot belly. It wasn't good weight. No, I don't need to be 170. Me walking around at 160, 155 is really good.
See, maybe that's the key though. Designing prop bets so that you're only happy to pay the money.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that do that. Like a lot of especially in the poker world, a lot of big weight prop bets and things like that people do. Yeah. There's one guy who's famous for it, Bill Perkins, who's he's prevalent on X, wealthy, business guy. And he likes to make people's dreams, if you will. He's like, he sees somebody that's way overweight and he bets them a large amount of money. Says, you put up 50,000, I'll put up $1 million. And he did it recently with a guy where, this guy was very overweight and he gave him 1 year to get to like 17% body fat, where when you're starting at 40 and you have a year, that's not easy. And with about 2 months to go, he was on track and, they made a settlement. So, but again, so for him, he actually wrote a book called Die with Zero. It's a very good book. And the concept behind it is using money for experiences rather than things, right? Because buying a watch, right? You buy a watch, it gives you joy for a few moments, but then it's gone. It doesn't last, right? But memories and events and, vacations and things like that really do. Like him making a difference for this guy where, he really helped. Because not only, it's not about the money for him, it's about being able to, be a difference maker in a fun way. And so, he wrote that book. It did really well. I don't know if you've, check it out. Die with Zero.
No, I hadn't heard it. It's Die with Zero, meaning like die with zero things.
Die with zero money. Yeah. Die with zero everything. It's like spend your resources. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. I'll go book a vacation after this call.
Yeah.
I'm going home and telling my husband, Daniel said that we have to go to Hawaii.
Yeah.
If you had to bet your entire net worth on one hand of poker, who's the last person you'd want it to be against?
Phil Ivey, for sure. Yeah, he's tough. He's the best in the world. He's the greatest poker player of all time. It's my opinion. So, if I'm trying to win, I don't want to play against him.
Is there a moment when you knew that you had made it in your career?
There was a few moments, but I think, my first World Series of Poker, I was already starting to make my name, on the circuit, if you will, but like smaller stuff. And then the first World Series of Poker event I was able to play, I won it. And I was the youngest at the time at age 23 back in 1998. So I would say that moment, my bankroll took a big, increase. I was in a new stratosphere. I blew all that money, too. But the point was at that point, I felt like
zero.
I made it. Oh, I did. I blew all that money. I loaned it out, staked the wrong people, made all the mistakes you make as a young, 20 something in Vegas, but life lessons.
There you go. If poker players had walkout songs, what would yours be?
Probably Eye of the Tiger, because I'm a huge Rocky fan.
Nice.
He gets me pumped. Yeah.
Classic. Okay. This is my final ask of you, which is, I've been doing this thing, arguing with a lawyer, where we argue about something rather banal. It's just like each person gets 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 15 seconds. And it's just fun because I love arguing. And also I think it just reinforces in our society the need and the value of arguing in debate, and that you can debate about anything and you can do it civilly. So I have a proposed topic for you. It's about Traitors because I'm into Traitors right now.
Okay.
Cherie should have split the money with Ari. Oh, spoiler alert. I'm going to have to put that.
It's an older season. Yeah.
Yeah, it's season 1. But, at the end, there's 2 traitors and one basically. They could have just taken the money and ended the game and split it. But instead, Cherie, she voted to not end the game so that she wouldn't have to split the money. And should she have? Should Cherie have split the money, or was she right in what she did? Which side do you want to take? I'll take the other.
Okay. Well, I'm a gamer, right? And you come in there with one objective, and it's to win all the money and to do everything to help your family. It's about you. It's an individual game. So you strategize to give yourself the best opportunity to maximize your chance for maximum profit, right? Relationships are on the side. She spent the entire season lying, deceiving people with the ultimate goal of helping her family. So I fully support her decision to take it all the way to the end, and play the game the way it was meant to be played.
All right. I'll take the other side of that. I don't resent her for doing it. I understand why she did it. I think she wanted to help her family, and I am not, I admire that. But you also have to sleep at night. And for me, I couldn't. And she didn't do it purely. It would have been one thing to just say, I don't want to end the game and to throw him under the bus that way. But she also, I think, played on the other people's heartstrings by saying, oh, these people really need the money and we all earned it and you don't need it because you're wealthy, or all these things that she said. And then she went and took the money away from them too. And so I think it was just too deceitful for me. It just crossed the line that I personally would have just taken the money because I can't look at her the same way, and it gave me an icky feeling afterwards.
Yeah. Well, strategy-wise, too, within the game, I think it's a big mistake to ever agree to split. Because when you throw your thing in the fire and you say that I want to end the game now with 4 people left, well, if somebody else doesn't, right, now they might be like, well, why are you so eager to quit the game right now, right? So if you were one that said, I don't want to quit the game yet, well, if you are a traitor, it makes sense for you to want to, right? By doing that, you again throw the scent off of yourself in a spot that could really expose you. So I would never, I would go to the very bitter end. There's no point where I would split.
Oh, that's interesting. That is, I might be persuaded to the other side now that you have to always just say that you don't want to end the game. Otherwise, it looks too much like you do. But then what if it's 2 people left?
Well, when it's 2 people, it's just the game is over. And then the reveal happens. If you're both faithfuls, you chop. And if you're not, you have to look the other person and say, he got some bad news for you, but I'll take you out for a beer. How about that?
Well, thank you so much. I was saying about how I would love to meet Paul McCartney. And so I'm a big fan of the Beatles and Paul McCartney. And I watched this interview with him where he said that some days he gets up and he looks in the mirror and he says to myself, I'm a Beatle. And I think how cool that is and how, he really has this power everywhere he goes to just like make people's lives better. They get their whole lives. They get to say, I met Paul McCartney and I've met celebrities before. And I saw one in Vegas. I saw Billie Eilish's brother, Phineas, who I'm actually a big fan of. And it made my whole day. I was skipping around and I was calling my friends. And by the same token, I'm just so grateful that you said yes. And you've made my day. And I hope you've brought attention to really important issues and what I view as a very important law firm. And I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. I want to say real quickly, I do a decent amount of podcasts and I'm not blowing smoke. I think you do a really good job. You know what you're doing. It's a really cool angle that you're taking, sort of like with your expertise. And, podcasts are a thing now, but I think you have a niche here. And I think you do. It was a lot of fun. It was a good conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to record that and play it on loop as I sleep at night. So thank you.
You got it.
Thanks, Daniel. I just want to check in. Lindsay, is the video okay for you? Because it is lagging for me.
It is, but I'm getting an alert that the recording will be higher quality.
Okay. All right. Well,
my video
it's
view
lagging,
is perfect.
like it's skipping, like you feel it. You hear.
it was, but I think it caught up now.
Audio. Okay.